Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Streamlining ITAR Compliance with Encryption and Enclaving, presented by NeoSystems and PreVeil. I'm Don Carnevale, Marketing Director at NeoSystems, and I'll be the moderator for today's event. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can enter them into the Q&A area within Zoom. We will have time at the end of the presentation to address your questions. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers and have them say a few words before we begin. First is Randy Batat, co-founder and CEO at PreVeil. Randy?
Hey, thank you, Don, and welcome everyone. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks for joining us. Hope you find this webinar really informative for you. A little bit about our company, PreVeil. We are a cybersecurity company, and we make a software as a service product that does end-to-end encryption for email and file storage and sharing. So that means that information is encrypted on a client device, never ever decrypted in the cloud, and only gets decrypted when it gets to its ultimate destination. And so that means if bad guys attack the cloud, all they see is gibberish. The email can work either with your browser or with your favorite mail client, like Microsoft Outlook, Mac Mail, or even Gmail. And the file storage and sharing works a lot like Dropbox and OneDrive. You just interact with your desktop, file explorer, and you can access and share your files, but it's all end-to-end encrypted in the cloud. Let me turn that over to Stuart now.
Well, great. Thank you, Randy. And again, thank you as well to everybody for joining us today. My name is Stuart Itkin. I'm a Senior Vice President with NeoSystems. At NeoSystems, we're experts in compliance and government regulatory requirements, so our clients don't need to be. We provide managed back office services for accounting, finance, payroll, HR, and IT, and we provide secure work environments for handling ITAR-controlled information and CUI, which offer clients an accelerated, affordable, low-risk path to compliance readiness. So before we start talking about streamlining ITAR, we're going to start by reviewing what ITAR is. Right? We're going to provide an overview of the requirements for handling ITAR-controlled information, and we're going to tell you how to determine whether ITAR applies to your organization. Then we'll talk about the two components of streamlining ITAR compliance, those being the use of encryption and second, operating in a secure work environment for handling ITAR-controlled information. Finally, we'll describe how putting these two components together can provide a faster and a proven solution for addressing ITAR requirements. So let's start at the beginning and talk about ITAR. What is ITAR? So ITAR stands for the International Traffic in Arms Regulations. ITAR controls the export and the import of defense-related articles and services that are listed on the United States munitions list, or sometimes you'll hear it referred to as the USML. And regulations are intended to ensure that defense technology and services do not fall into the hands of foreign adversaries. Now, all manufacturers, exporters, brokers of defense articles, defense services, or related technical data must comply with ITAR regulations, as must their component suppliers. They must register with the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls, or the DDTC, within the State Department, and they must understand and abide by the specific regulations to apply to the specific type of U.S. munitions listed goods or services they provide. As you're going to see, requirements for handling ITAR-controlled information are rigorous. They're strictly enforced by the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Department of Justice, and penalties for violating these requirements can be severe. And because of flowdowns, companies subject to ITAR regulations are requiring their supply chain members to be ITAR compliant as well. So as I previously mentioned, articles and services subject to ITAR controls are listed on the United States munitions list. And this can be found in the Code of Federal Regulations, Title 22, Part 121, which you can access on the DDTC website. And rather than giving you the link, you can just Google DDTC, and the list can be found under the heading Understand the ITAR, and then clicking on International Traffic and Arms Regulations. The list is organized into 4 categories. Category 1 is small firearms, things that go boom. Category 2 is larger destructive devices like cannons and grenade launchers, so things that make bigger booms. Third is ammunition and ordnances. And fourth includes such things as launch vehicles, missiles, torpedoes, and bombs. And the list of items within these 4 categories is on the right side of the slide. And again, those can be found on the DDTC website, along with detailed descriptions for each and the list of specific requirements that apply to each type of ITAR controlled items. Again, who is subject to ITAR? Well, those that are subject to ITAR are any company involved in the manufacture, the design, the sale, or the distribution of items that are found on the U.S. munitions list. And this can include defense contractors, aerospace and aviation firms, electronics and semiconductor companies, software and IT companies, universities and research institutions, logistics and shipping, MRO or maintenance and repair organizations, and non-U.S. companies and foreign subsidiaries of U.S. companies that engage in activities that involve ITAR-controlled items or technical data. And again, it's not just the prime manufacturer, but their component suppliers as well that need to be ITAR compliant. So if company A sells a part to company B, and then company B sells the same part to a foreign power, then both company A as well as company B are subject to ITAR controls. And as I mentioned earlier, there are strict requirements for handling ITAR data, and the specific requirements vary by type. And again, the specific requirements can be found on the DDTC website. There are general requirements that apply to all ITAR-controlled goods and services, starting with data residency. All controlled technical data, defense article, and services must be stored, processed, and transmitted within the United States unless specifically authorized otherwise by the DDTC through an export license. This means that ITAR data cannot be stored on servers located outside the U.S. or accessed by foreign persons without appropriate authorization. And this includes the individuals that work in the data centers. The primary goal of data residency requirements is to prevent unauthorized access and to ensure that sensitive defense-related information remains under the control of U.S. jurisdiction. The second is data protection. ITAR control data in transit must be encrypted during transmission over public or untrusted networks using strong encryption methods such as FIPS 140-2 validated encryption to ensure that data can't be intercepted or accessed by unauthorized parties while being transmitted. Data at rest must also be encrypted when stored, whether it's on physical devices or digital storage media. End-to-end encryption should be used to ensure the data remains encrypted, as Randy described, from the point of origin to the final destination, and that it's not decrypted and enter in any intermediary points. Additionally, there are physical controls, not just digital controls. Physical documents must be stored in locked, secure areas with controlled access, and both physical and digital media must be kept in a secure, access-controlled environment. Third are personnel requirements. Only U.S. persons are authorized to access ITAR-controlled information, and U.S. persons are defined as U.S. citizens, permanent residents, people with green cards, and protected individuals. Additionally, organizations handling ITAR data must ensure that these personnel are properly vetted and that they're trained to understand and comply with ITAR regulations. Additionally, ITAR information needs to be properly marked, and strong security measures such as intrusion detection and data loss prevention must be in place, and logs must be audited regularly to detect possible unauthorized access. So how can you tell if ITAR regulations apply to you? Well, first, see if your products, services, or technical data are listed on the U.S. munitions list. Second, assess whether your organization handles technical data that is directly related to defense articles. And this can include blueprints, plans, instructions, and any other information that can be used to develop or produce defense articles. And third, examine your business activities to determine if they involve the manufacture, export, import, or brokering of defense articles or services. Fourth, and very important, seek advice from legal counsel or compliance experts who specialize in export control and ITAR regulations. And finally, conduct an internal audit of your products and services and business processes to identify any potential ITAR-related activities. And this includes reviewing contracts, partnerships, and supply chains for involvement with defense articles. So I know that was kind of a mouthful. Again, a lot of requirements that need to be followed. And so, Randy, let me ask you, how can the technical requirements for handling ITAR be simplified?
Sure. Thanks, Stuart. So as Stuart was mentioning, there's a lot of work to export data that needs to be protected this way. You have to register with the State Department and so forth. But what about electronic communications? Because a lot of times you want to send information over existing open telecommunications networks, let's say. So let's go to the next slide. And the State Department a couple of years ago created this carve out just for electronic communication. And they said if you meet a few tests, then that data when it's transmitted electronically will not be considered exported, and you don't have to file a bunch of paperwork and so forth with the State Department. Some of the requirements include that the data cannot be classified, that the recipient has to be a U.S. person, and the data is not sent to or from or stored in a restricted country like China, Russia, or Iran. And the rest of it says it's got to be encrypted end to end, so it looks like gibberish to anybody eavesdropping on that telecommunication network. In other words, it's encrypted at the source and never decrypted till it gets to its intended recipient. Furthermore, the technology used for encryption has to comply with this particular NIST standard called FIPS 140-2. And the software, not only just the vendor doesn't have to just claim that their software algorithms are compatible with this, they're actually validated. The software itself is validated by NIST. And very important, nobody in the middle can have access to any of the decryption keys. So only the sender has access to the encryption keys and the recipient, the decryption keys. Then if you follow all of these rules, then that data is not considered exported. Next slide. And PreVeil can help you with all this stuff because one, our software complies with all that stuff. It's end-to-end encryption. The software has been validated specifically by the National Institute for Standards and Technologies. And it's used already by over 1,200 defense contractors for both ITAR and CMMC. We're going to touch on CMMC in a minute or two. But it's already used by lots and lots of companies. And it's used for a couple of main reasons. Companies want to be compliant. It's super easy to install and deploy and use because it works with the way you already do things, File Explorer, your favorite email clients, and so forth. The keys are managed in a very simple way, so you don't have to, get deep into managing keys yourself. The system handles a lot of that. And most importantly, it's cost effective. It can save you as much as 60% versus other alternatives. It does that in a few ways. One, it lets you use often commercial versions of your email clients and things like that. So you don't have to buy special versions just for ITAR. And PreVeil puts this end-to-end encryption wrapping and sends it over the PreVeil system. Second, it allows you to create just an enclave where the sensitive information is living. If you're a large organization, hundreds of thousands of people, but maybe you only have a few dozen that are dealing with ITAR, let's say, you don't have to deploy PreVeil across your thousands and thousands of employees. You can just deploy it across the dozen or two that need that protection. And another important reason is that PreVeil allows you to communicate with others, and recipients of the information can use a free version. So if you have a supplier or a customer or a client you need to communicate with, they can grab a free version of PreVeil. You do not have to buy extra licenses just for them. But that's the technology. Stuart, let's talk on the rest of the things you need to do to be compliant.
Well, very good. And thank you, Randy. And we talked before, we described there are other requirements for handling ITAR controlled data other than the technical requirements. Technical requirements, we said such things as encryption, but there are the requirements that are non-technical that include such things as qualifying and vetting, training personnel, auditing logs to detect unauthorized access, controlling physical access so that only people who are authorized can gain access to locations in which ITAR information is being handled. And in the same way that Randy referred to creating an enclave, what we're talking about is really creating a broader enclave for handling ITAR data, or in which ITAR data can be handled, and in which we place or restrict ITAR handling to that portion of an organization, so an entire organization isn't in scope. So to satisfy ITAR regulations, we must ensure that the ITAR controlled information is handled in a secure environment that has been designed, an enclave that has been created specifically for handling such information. And to secure this information, it first needs to start with your IT, and to ensure that that your IT environment meets such requirements as data residency and security. But second, on top of this, there are things that we need to add. Second, an organization needs to ensure that it has policies and procedures to follow that will enable them to meet those requirements for handling ITAR controlled data. They need to ensure that things that need to be done, how things need to be marked, and so forth are identified, and particular or specifically reduced to procedures that can be followed within the organization to ensure that those organizations are meeting that set of requirements. Third, are the facilities in which individuals access ITAR controlled data and in which ITAR controlled data is stored, whether that's physical media or whether it's digital meeting, but all of that must be in a secure and an access controlled environment. So that's really the second component that we're adding in building a secure work environment. On top of the IT then needs to be accessed from a control environment. A lot of it, of course, can be in the cloud, like the control application, but with respect to access, it needs to be accessed by individuals who are in a secure work environment that is access controlled and protected. Fourth, are the people requirements that we mentioned earlier. And it's not just your people, but it's the contractors and its service providers that may have access to ITAR controlled information. And the requirements are that these individuals must be vetted or verified to be U.S. persons. They must go through a background check, and they actually must pass the background check to verify they're not a security risk. And they must be trained to understand ITAR requirements and to understand the requirements for handling ITAR controlled information. And so this is, again, a fourth component that needs to be added to the secure work environment. And then finally, the environment needs to be managed to ensure that the policies and procedures are enforced and that the environment is being operated compliantly. So for such things as information marking, you have a policy, you have a procedure, but there needs to be oversight and management to ensure that that is being followed. There needs to be a procedure relating to people to ensure that people are vetted, that background checks occur, that trainings occurred before they are provisioned in the system and given access to ITAR information. Again, these procedures not only need to be established, but they need to be managed and monitored to ensure that they're being followed. And audit trails or audit logs are important to be able to provide objective evidence at the time of an assessment or a certification requirement. So these are really the requirements for building a secure work environment for handling ITAR information. And this is what NeoSystems does. We create secure, compliant work environments for our clients for handling ITAR controlled information and other CUI. We help them achieve compliance by providing any additional IT and security tools that may be required. We provide the policies and procedures that are known to meet the ITAR regulation requirements for our clients to be able to adopt and to follow. We provide a complete system security plan, and we help curate the documentation and other objective evidence that may be required for an assessment or for an audit. We can also manage the work environment, ranging from managing IT operations to managing the process of background checks or onboarding, and we can provide comprehensive end-to-end security management monitoring, incident identification, incident response, and so forth. And finally, it's important to recognize that compliance with ITAR or any other regulations such as CMMC, it's not an end state. You're never done. It's a process, and we work with our clients to ensure that their environment remains compliant as their business grows and as the regulations tend to evolve over time. So, Randy, how do we put this together?
Yeah, so each of us plays a complementary role. We've been partners for a while here. PreVeil is focused on the technology pieces, the end-to-end encryption, email, file storage, and sharing. And Stuart just talked about all the business process and IT support and security support that NeoSystems can provide. And I'd like to, show you an example of just how powerful this combination can be for those of you that choose to work with us. CMMC is, some of you may have heard of it, is a close cousin of ITAR. It's definitely related. And it's the Cybersecurity Maturity Metric Certification. It's really an extension of the rules and regulations around controlled unclassified information. NIST 800-171 is the standard that describes 110 controls that any company that's dealing with controlled unclassified information has to follow in order to secure that information. The problem historically was there was just not a whole lot of enforcement. So what CMMC does is it adds the requirement that an organization, any organization that's dealing with this CUI, has to be assessed by a certified CMMC assessor in order ultimately to be part of the DoD supply chain. There will come a point in time when a prime cannot get a contract unless they and every single one of their suppliers and their suppliers and their suppliers throughout the whole supply chain have been assessed and certified as compliant with NIST 800-171. So CMMC adds this compliance requirement. And for fun here, we decided to take a look at, these are all the 110 controls. We're not going to go through every one of these. They're in various categories. But as you can see, it's kind of daunting if you just start with this all by yourself and you've got to take each one of these controls, implement it in your organization. For some of these, there's IT technology parts that you have to do. Some parts, they're business processes. Some parts, it's noting of policies and procedures, and you have to prove that you're following them, and so forth. It's a lot to do. Now, next slide. If you adopt PreVeil, the PreVeil system itself can knock off all the ones in orange. And between the PreVeil system and other things that you add, the ones in yellow, you can knock off, as you can see, the vast majority. You're only on your own for those handful of little blue ones there. But if you take PreVeil and NeoSystems together, what we both do together, now let's go to the next slide. Now you can see we're knocking off together, from what we're doing, the vast majority of these 110 controls. There's so much orange there. There's none of these where you're left on your own. There's no blue squares left. And, a smaller fraction, a quarter or so of them, that involve shared responsibility between yourself, PreVeil, and NeoSystems. So together, we can help simplify and accelerate this whole compliance journey. Don, shall I turn it back to you?
Thank you, Randy. Yes, that was great. A lot of great information. And we've had a lot of interest in this topic. we've certainly seen some questions come in during the presentation, but we also had a number of people submit questions ahead of time. So I've got those here ready. So we're going to run through these, and Randy and Stuart, you all can jump in as we go through this. The first question is, what are the consequences of ITAR non-compliance?
Well, either of us can go. It's nasty. You can get fined of $1 million. You can go to jail for 10 years per violation. These consequences can be bestowed upon organizations and individuals. They're pretty significant.
Okay, another question that came in. What is the most common error with regards to ITAR compliance?
Stuart, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I don't know that there is one in particular. I think it starts with, organizations who haven't taken the time to fully understand the requirements and the regulations that exist and ensure that that they're following them. A number of them, relate to fully applying security measures to their IT environment. So again, such things as ensuring that they've got incident detection, that they've got data loss prevention, that they're doing log monitoring to be able to detect potential incidents or occurrences of unauthorized access. But I'm not sure that I'd point to one or in particular that are most common. The problem is, I think that there are so many of them, so many requirements that are there, that it's ensuring that they're all understood and they're all compliantly understood. And again, I think the benefit of what Randy and I are talking about is, the ability for somebody to address and satisfy these requirements without they themselves needing to know all of these regulations or needing to know what's required to satisfy them, but by working with partners who can bring kind of pre-built solutions that have been built to satisfy those requirements. So for example, PreVeil addressing the encryption requirements, are providing policies and procedures for an organization to follow, that when they follow them, they can have confidence that they are satisfying the regulations and the requirements that exist under ITAR. I know, Randy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I'd add one biggie that seems to come up a bunch is just unintended sharing of information that really should be controlled. And, don't forget, a lot of times this stuff is marked. If you have a customer or whatever that's dealing with this, they will mark the data ITAR and restricted and so forth. But it doesn't have to necessarily be marked. As long as the information is pertaining to the U.S. munitions list, it follows under these regs. So that's why, we like to say, if you're getting anywhere near close to this, just send the information end-to-end encrypted, and you can kind of protect yourself and the people you're dealing with.
All right. The next question is there a formal certification process to become ITAR compliant?
No, unlike CMMC, you don't have to get certified by or assessed by an auditor. It's up to you to protect the information.
But again, with heavy consequences, if you represent that you have, and it turns out that you have not, and not only penalties under the ITAR regulations, the Department of Justice enforces criminal violations, and organizations can be subject to the False Claims Act for simply indicating that they do without having thoroughly understood the requirements and verifying that in fact they do.
All right. So the next question is, it sounds a bit technical, but what's the difference between, quote, confusing encryption at rest versus encryption in transit versus E2EE?
Yeah, that's a good one. And E2EE means end-to-end encryption. So encryption at rest means that the data is stored encrypted when you're not using it. A lot of you have disk encryption on your laptop computer, for example, right? So that if you weren't using it and somebody steals your laptop and they pry the hard disk out, without your password on the computer, they couldn't get at your data. That's what encryption at rest is. Encryption in transit, most of us are also used to. That's just encrypting the traffic as it flows between client and server on the internet. For example, if you use a web browser, Often, most sites, if you do HTTPS, that's a secure TLS connection between your client and the server. So what that means is somebody just listening in on the internet is not going to be able to read your data, but they could break into the server because the information is decrypted once it gets to the server and get at your data that way. End-to-end encryption encrypts the data even through the server. The server cannot see your data. So again, a bad guy breaking into the server cannot read your data. It's only getting decrypted at the client device at the other end when the recipient is looking at it. So that's the difference between those three things. Don,
Yeah, sorry about that. So we had a question come in that was mentioned earlier, but how does ITAR relate to CMMC?
Well,
you want to take that one?
Yeah, I can start with that one, and then kind of feel free to jump in. So ITAR is a category or a class of CUI as defined in the NARA register, and as such, the 800-171 requirements apply to organizations that are handling ITAR data. The DFARS 7012 clause applies to the handling of ITAR information. And so as such, CMMC, which is a program to ensure or to enforce CMMC, to enforce that organizations are following 800-171, will apply to somebody with ITAR data that is working for the Department of Defense because it is technically within the realm of CUI.
All right. Next question is, you mentioned that you provide procedures for such things as onboarding and ensuring that they're following those procedures. How do you do that? And is that done by having someone at their facility?
Fortunately, we don't need to have somebody at the facility. With the clients we'd need to have hundreds of people at hundreds of facilities. Rather, again, it starts with having policies and then procedures for the execution or operation of those policies that have been created to satisfy the requirements for handling ITAR information have been verified by assessors to satisfy that set of requirements. Then what we do to be able to enable our clients to use those is that we implement them within workflow engines. And so something such as onboarding a new person, it starts with using an onboarding engine where the steps are automated. Step one, information needs to be applied. That person will then be scheduled for background screening. Once that information is brought back and recorded in the workflow engine, the next step for training will be scheduled. The training will be verified to the workflow engine. The next step will be placed to be able to provision that individual and so forth. So not only are we providing these procedures, but we're helping automate these procedures to make it easy for a client to be able to follow. And as a consequence of that, this workflow engine is providing an audit trail that documents or provides the evidence if and when somebody needs to go through a CMMC certification assessment, for example, that shows not only do we have this procedure, but here's the evidence that we've been following it and that we've not violated it.
Okay, next question is, if I have questions concerning what data we have is covered and what is not, can you help us?
I think the best help we can provide in that case is suggest that you kind of talk to your attorney or a compliance expert. Again, the rules for ITAR, they're very specific. If you go to the DTTC website, for each one of those individual categories that are listed, you'll find a lot of detailed information. And like all things that are written by the government, it is just absolutely crystal clear and unambiguous. So to help ensure that you actually understood and understand what you need to do. Consulting with an attorney or consulting with a compliance expert really is the best advice that we can provide. And I'd kind of warn somebody that, that if you're working with a managed service provider or an RPO organization that advises you, again, they're not able to provide the legal advice, which really is crucial to ensure that you're making the right decisions. And Randy, anything to add there?
Nope. Sometimes it's easy, it's marked, but not always, though. is the
Not
problem.
always.
Next question is, are both your companies providing solutions for companies with ITAR requirements today?
Yes.
I think absolutely. We've got many clients that are using our solutions to be able to control or to comply with ITAR handling requirements.
Okay, another question that's come in. How does ITAR marking reconcile with CUI marking requirements? Is there any guidance or clarification on consolidated markings?
Well, so with respect to CMMC and CUI, again, there are two general categories of CUI: CUI specified and CUI basic. And ITAR falls into the category of CUI specified. And the specific requirements for marking ITAR are going to exist either in the NARA registry, and the NARA registry will refer one to the DTTC website for additional requirements for marking that category of ITAR information. But it's kind of a path from the NARA registry to the DTTC website to be able to find those requirements. There are specific wording that needs to be on ITAR information. And again, that's where you'll find it specified.
All right. Another question is, what's the difference between ITAR registered and ITAR compliant?
Well, I think registered is just simply the process of registering with the DTTC. Compliant, and let me make sure that I'm clear on this. Any organization that is handling or believes that it's handling ITAR information needs to register with the DTTC. Compliant is the step of verifying, or when you state that you're ITAR compliant, that you're stating that you've satisfied all of the requirements that apply to that particular type of ITAR. So, and it is a self kind of assessment, a self attestation, as it were, stating that you are compliant. And Randy, anything that you would add there?
No.
Okay.
I thought you handled that just fine. Thanks.
Another question that's come in is ITAR falling into CMMC level 2 scope?
Yes, it is CUI, and CUI organizations that store, process, or handle CUI will be required to achieve a level 2 CMMC certification at a minimum, may require, depending on the type of information in the contract, to be certified at level 3 under CMMC.
Yeah, just to add, CMMC kind of defines 3 different levels. There's a level 1, which is kind of a basic level for lots of information. Level 2 specifically talks to controlled, unclassified information. And level 3 is an even smaller subset than that.
Right.
Another question that's come in is, can PreVeil or NeoSystems assist an organization in identifying if they need to be ITAR or CMMC compliant?
I think as we would typically do, we can provide a list of questions for an organization to kind of ask. We would provide kind of essentially the same recommendations that were included in the earlier slide, to look at the information, to look at to see if any information they're handling is on the United States munitions list, to look at their business processes, to contact an attorney or a compliance expert. But ultimately, we're not one that's going to make that judgment to be able to say this is or it is not ITAR data, or which particular category it falls into. It's really the responsibility of the organization. We can point them in the direction of the questions or the experts who can provide them specific guidance.
I just said most of the time, especially when talking about with ITAR, again, you have to see if what you're doing is related to this munitions list. With other forms of CUI, if you're a prime contractor, you've already established what is controlled unclassified information in the context of your contract with the DoD. For most people on this call, probably not prime contractors, probably somewhere else in the supply chain to a prime contractor. And then it's up to your client, your customer, the person you're doing business with, to make sure that CUI markings, the definition and so forth is flowing down into the pieces of what you do. So that's all really clear as to what applies there.
I think that's a good point, Randy. And again, just like we see the government overmarking things and sending them down and saying this is CUI, we've seen the same thing with prime contractors that are flowing down the 7012 clause to organizations that actually aren't getting CUI or aren't getting ITAR information. If your prime contractor or somebody that you're doing business with flows the 7012 clause down to you, they're telling you they believe that you're handling controlled unclassified information, and that may also include ITAR information. But a good advice is to kind of verify that yourself, and if you believe that you're not handling CUI or ITAR information, to be able to push back and to tell them, no, we don't feel this applies, and we'd like you to remove this requirement for the contract. Kind of overmarking as well as kind of overflowing down of information. I'm not sure that's the right verb, but is not uncommon. It's just easier for a contract officer to kind of flow something down or say this is a requirement. Just kind of verify for yourself whether you really are subject to these requirements in all cases.
Another question is, can you clarify why ITAR is considered to fall under DFARS 7012?
Well, I think it again, because it is a category of CUI. So a defense contractor who is subject to ITAR regulations is handling ITAR, a category of CUI. And again, the 7012 clause applies to any DoD contractor or subcontractor that in their organization or within their systems is storing, processing, or transmitting CUI. And so it's kind of, ITAR data is CUI, but not all CUI is ITAR data.
Okay, we did have some additional questions, but a number of them are very detailed with regards to PreVeil's solution and NeoSystems solution, so we're not going to go too in depth on that, but I just want to let everyone know that we will be sharing the recording of this webinar as well as the slide deck from today's presentation. You'll be receiving an email from us in the next day or two with links to those information, as well as some additional information, resources from PreVeil and NeoSystems.
Oh, great. Well, thank you, Don, and thank you all for joining.
Whoops, did we lose Stuart? Is it just me?
Nope, looks like Stuart may be frozen. But again, that concludes today's webinar. So we want to thank everyone for attending. Again, if you have any questions, you can certainly reach out to us. We will be contacting you soon with the information I mentioned earlier. Have a great day. Goodbye.
And I think on my behalf and on behalf of Frozen Stuart there, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it. We'll look forward to following up to the other questions you may have asked at a more detailed level via written answers. Thank you again.
Thank you.